Hi, everybody. I am Shelly Bennett. I am the Public Relations Manager at Midas Gold, Idaho, and I will be the one manning the questions and the webinar chat. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the question and answer form, and if I can answer it right away while Haley and Mackenzie are presenting, I will. If not, we can definitely throw all of those questions at Haley and Mackenzie after the presentation. So Haley and Mackenzie will both be kind of co-presenting on this. We're expecting it to be about a 40-minute presentation. And we just want to say thank you very much to Emily and Becky and the rest of the Women's Mining Coalition for giving us this opportunity. We're pretty excited to try it out and to share our project with everybody. So Haley, Mackenzie?
Great. Well, Haley, do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself, and then I'll jump in?
Absolutely. So I've met a lot of you. I was at the DC Fly-In this last year, also at a lot of the industry-based conferences. My name is Haley Ramber, and I'm the Community Education Manager for Midas Gold. I'm a geologist, and my background is also in secondary education. So primary with Midas is kind of taking a very complex project, an industry in a whole, and making it so that it's easily understandable for members of the public, not just K through 12 grade levels. I am an Idahoan, live here in Donley, so relatively close to our projects, and happy to be here today. So,
No, thanks. Well, and to echo Shelly and Haley, this is Mackenzie Lyon. I work in our public affairs and external affairs team here at Midas, and I've done so for about 3 years internally and about 5 years before that as a consultant. So I've come to love this project, and I'm very thrilled and honored to be able to help advocate for it. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us this morning. As Haley and Shelly said, this is our first webinar, so we're trying things out. Any feedback afterwards is very, very welcome. And additionally, we had originally planned to do this webinar when we thought we were going to be in the middle of the comment period for our draft DIS. We have since learned that that comment period is delayed, and in fact, as of today, it's been announced that the public comment period will open in August. So between now and then, our hope is to do a series of these, not only with this group, but other groups as well. So this first presentation is meant to be very high level, just to kind of do a level setting on here's what the project is, here's some of the basic principles and foundations behind it, out of the hope that we could then transition in the future to doing some more technically based conversations around specific features or elements of the project. So to dive in, and there's a little bit of a delay on the screen, so I apologize if it gets annoying. So there's 3 main messages when it comes to the Stibnite Gold Project. The first is that this is a mining project that's absolutely designed to help repair a legacy site. The second is that we have antimony, which is listed as a critical mineral. And the third is that this is a project which is going to mean a massive investment in rural Idaho, bringing over 500 jobs and $1 billion investment to a rural community. So we get a lot of questions, well, who's Midas Gold? Midas Gold Idaho is a company of people. Almost all of us are here in Idaho. I was born and raised here as well. And our parent company is Midas Gold Corp. Midas Gold Corp is a Canadian company based in Vancouver, Canada, and it has a staff of 4 people. That team is primarily focused on the financing for the project and our status on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Stibnite, Stibnite is located about 2 hours from Cascade, Idaho, in the central mountains of Idaho. To get there, we typically go to Cascade. We travel then down Warm Lake Road and the South Fork or Johnson Creek roads to the little town of Yellow Pine, which has about 20 people. And 14 miles from Yellow Pine is the old historic Stibnite mining district. Mining first started at Stibnite in 1899 as part of the gold rush that came to the region. The site was mined for gold, antimony, silver, and tungsten, but primarily mined during the World War II era, both when the blockade in the Pacific created a demand for domestically sourced tungsten and antimony. And that's really when most of the mining happened on site. In fact, the area was so significant to the war effort that afterwards it was declared by the Munitions Board that the effort of the men and women at Stibnite actually shortened World War II by a year and saved 1 million American lives because of that tungsten and antimony. So there's this great positive legacy that comes from Stibnite that so many of us, even having grown up in Idaho, are fairly unaware of. Because predominantly what we see is a different kind of legacy. We see the environmental legacy that was left behind. So through that mining, most of which happened at Stibnite long before environmental regulations or even the ethos around how we mine today and how we leave it when we're done, there's some major features on site. Most predominantly, over 10.5 million tons of spent ore and tailings that we believe are degrading water quality. There's the Yellow Pine Pit. So today, the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River dumps into that pit, causing a cascade that has blocked salmon migration to the upper watershed for over 80 years. And then there's just generally a lot of degraded habitat and Blowout Creek as well. And Haley will go into that in a few minutes. But essentially, the opportunity that the Stibnite Gold Project presents is that we can go back into this abandoned mining site and not only bring back kind of the resource of the economic resource that's still present at Stibnite, but in doing so, we can bring these environmental solutions that are very much needed. And so we really see both of those elements working together. So when our team looked at the project and looked at the site, it was very clear early on that if we were going to make this happen, because it's a challenging project and a challenging location, we were going to have to be very forward on a couple of principles. The first was that we needed to be stewards of the environment, that we were going to have to do everything we could to minimize our impact on it, and then also leave the area better than it is today. So for those reasons, as the team built the plan, we put in some very essential features to it. We designed it by first thinking, what do we want it to look like when we're done? And how do we use mining as the vehicle to get there? How do we look at reestablishing dynamic and sustainable portions of the ecosystem? And how do we use the resources that we're going to bring, not only from a financial standpoint and a technical standpoint and expertise, to clean up some of those legacies that remain on site and do it early. And then, of course, one of the biggest components of the project now is how can we help be a solution for fish migration and enhancing the fisheries in the area. So I'll let Haley dive in a little bit to talk about those legacy and solution components of the project.
So with the Stibnite Gold Project, one of our primary sources in transparency and getting boots on the ground is facilitating a tour program that's open to the public. Anyone and everyone is highly encouraged to get up to site because we really think that having the boots on the ground is the best approach to see what's going on. Because as Mackenzie mentioned, we do have some pretty significant legacies that were left behind by past mining. One of those is Blowout Creek. So this is actually the location of a historic, so an earthen dam here that provided hydroelectric power to the town site. This dam actually failed in 1965, essentially causing this pretty significant incision that you see here. So this right here is the primary source of sedimentation in the entire watershed, which is located on our project site.
Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to change the slides for you, aren't I?
You are. So this is one of those legacies that we address early on in our project. So obviously as a primary source of sedimentation, it's very important to us to find a solution. So on the left, you see the current site conditions. So our solution is to actually install a French drain system. So we will reestablish, so regradiate and restabilize this drainage. Ultimately, with the long-term solution is that we're overall with an improvement to water quality. We're stabilizing the water table. So when this blew, this actually dropped the water table over 14 feet. So bringing that back up is a primary source. So really every spring from this sediment source, it actually looks like chocolate milk hitting a stream. So this is one of those first issues that we actually addressed during construction during our project timeline. Another one of those legacy issues is the SODA, so the spent ore disposal area. So this is 10.5 million tons of unlined tailings with a waste rock cap on top from the historic mining of its site. You can see that the tailings are the beige down below and with the waste rock cap on top. So this is located in the Meadow Creek Valley. So this is also headwaters in a project site location. In our plan, we actually will be removing and reprocessing these legacy tailings. So we can reprocess those historic tailings through our mill that we'll and we can actually repurpose the remaining 7.5 million tons of that spent heap leach ore that's on top of it, ultimately with development construction purposes on site. So we're not removing off site, but finding purposes there at Stibnite. Essentially, this is another key component that we'll talk about a little bit further on. So not only are we cleaning up this area, so removing all the historic tailings and that waste rock on top, but this will actually also be the home to our proposed TSF. And then the third kind of primary legacy that we really, draws a lot of attention to our project site is obviously the Yellow Pine Pit, also known as the Glory Hole up at Stibnite. So during World War II, this pit actually transitioned from an underground operation to ultimately blocking salmon passage from that point on, so 1938 until. So during World War II, primary sourcing for tungsten and antimony on site. In our plan, we have the Yellow Pine Pit restoration. So off to the left, you can see current site conditions. So post-mining of the Yellow Pine Pit, they essentially let the East Fork and the South Fork cut down through one of the high walls and what you see today. So we actually have a pit lake in the middle of the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River right here in Idaho. But more importantly, it's actually been blocking fish passage for over 80 years. And so that's something that in our plan, we wanted to also find a solution that wasn't 20 years from now or end of mine life, but something that we could proactively approach at the very beginning. Something we'll touch on a little bit later. I don't want to go too deep on it because we hope to have another series actually on our fish tunnel. But what we proposed is we've designed a fish tunnel that is just over 0.8 miles long. So it's an underground tunnel. It's roughly 15 by 15 feet. That actually divert. So you can see that kind of purple line over here. So that's actually where that fish tunnel will go. So one will be a river diversion during operations, and two will allow for fish access for the first time since 1938.
All right, so of course, we offer comes from largely the economic resources available at site. We really see, as I mentioned, both working hand in hand together and really working on the ground to talk to people in local communities about how economic development and the environment don't have to be mutually exclusive. These are things that can be complementary of each other and in fact can go hand in hand. Being good for the environment means good for business. And there's, it's been a curve to get over or a hill to get over with some people, but I think the plan itself really puts those words into motion and people are starting to see the opportunities that exist at site. So right now, I think as of our the draft EIS in the pre-feasibility study, we've identified over 4 million ounces of gold and 100 million pounds of antimony within the project. Another question we get a lot is about the project footprint. So here on this map, what you'll see is the hatched areas are places where there's historical disturbance from previous mining activity specifically. The dark purple is where our footprint overlays that historical disturbance. And then the lighter pink is where our footprint goes beyond that historic disturbance. So one of the things when placing our facilities, whether it's the tailings facility or the mill, we really pay attention to how can we get as much of our infrastructure as we can onto those historically disturbed areas. And it continues to shrink. So right now we've got about 45% of our project on legacy disturbance. Here you'll see, just to explain quickly, the dashed line is where there's a new power line that would come into site. The solid red line is the creation of Burnt Log Road, which is a combination of a couple of old logging and mining roads knitted together with a couple of new sections to come into site. Whereas currently, most people come into site from, or you would come into site from Yellow Pine, which is at the top of the map, more maroon road feature there. Another thing that we talk about a lot when we talk about footprint is the difference between reclamation and restoration. We've really set our goals high in our own standard of what we want to do to repair the site. So we talk to people about how reclamation standards are those standards that do create a very stable, static environment. They may not mimic natural conditions, but it is typically what is required of mining companies and of us to do. Whereas a restoration standard is something that we are pushing towards wherever we can on site. And we describe that as being, it's creating much more of that naturally resilient dynamic system that can better mimic natural conditions. And we'll show some examples of that here in a little bit. Another way that we are working on our footprint is to, rather than say that we will do mining and then our restoration and reclamation work, we are instead designing a project that evaluates how to address not only the legacy restoration that can occur as early as the construction process within the project, but then how we address our own disturbance from mining concurrently with mining. So restoration of our own disturbance happens as concurrently as we can make it throughout the 12 to 15 year life of operations. So right now we envision about a 3-year construction period, about a 12 to 15 year operations, and then 3 to 5 for those final closure activities. And then of course, ongoing monitoring after that. Another way that we've addressed footprint is we have worked in collaboration over the last 2 years with the Idaho Conservation League, looking at dark skies initiatives. So just over the range from us in the Sawtooth Wilderness, the Idaho Conservation League and others in communities like Stanley, Idaho, implemented a dark sky conservation area. And through this, we approached them and we said, well, we can't meet the standards of the Dark Skies Institute as a mining operation that's going to operate 24/7. How could we use some best practices and some good principles in identifying how we could reduce our light footprint as much as possible? So through that collaboration, we have put together kind of our standard for how industry can reduce light pollution. And what we found was that not only could we have a fairly significant reduction in our own lighting, but it would save us money and actually be safer for employees by reducing glare. So it was quite an interesting study and a good collaboration. We also talk a little bit about our tailings facility, like Haley mentioned. We've sited it on top of the old historic tailings on site, on top of the soda. We've placed it in a location that both allowed us to put it in a very, very geologically stable place where we've got it surrounded. About 90% of it is contained by mountains. And then there's a 10% wall that we would then buttress with 65 million tons of extra development rock. And that takes the factor of safety from what is required, about a 1.5, to far over a 3, creating a very stable location to place those tailings and utilizing as much of an existing disturbance footprint as we can. So you can see that here as well with the historic soda to the bottom of the picture, and then the future tailings dam on top.
So current site conditions, so what you can see to the top of your screen, so you have the East Fork and the South Fork ultimately flowing.
Sorry, Haley, I think there's just a delay.
Yeah, it's all good. Perfect. So what you can see at the top of your screen, like I was mentioning, is the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River that's flowing down into Yellow Pine Pit, so the pit lake that you see there. The biggest issue that we have from a fish passage perspective is this yellow section on your screen, which is actually the fish barrier. So that's ultimately where post-mining of the Yellow Pine Pit, when they diverted the East Fork, South Fork back through, we have these current conditions. So not only do we have blocked passage, but we also have degraded water quality and habitat going on. Essentially this gradient that you see that is kind of right in this fish barrier portion of this slide, it's over a legacy high wall, which is ultimately the gradient of it is exceeding about a 25%. So when you start looking at what we have in our watershed, so from bull trout, Chinook, steelhead, Chinook actually need about a 6% gradient or less for passage. So even if we had enough from a flow perspective to make it possible, it's clearly too steep. So this slide that we have, I believe, in front of us, I have to apologize. I think we're having some delays and lags in our slides. So in our plan, we have an interim fish passage. So this is our famous fish tunnel. So off to the left of the Yellow Pine Pit that you see in front of you is actually going to be that 0.9-mile fish tunnel. It is 15 by 15 feet in diameter. And it allows for fish access and passage back to their spawning grounds for the first time since 1938, as well as working as a diversion for our water. So this tunnel itself gets built during our construction timeline and is fully functional before we ever go into operations. This is a fantastic and very innovative approach, and we're pretty proud of our fish tunnel. So hopefully all of you will be able to chime back in later on. We want to do another webinar series just focusing on the engineering, design, and innovation of this fish tunnel implemented in our project. And of course, following fish passage, we have river restoration. So the ultimate goal within our project boundaries was, not to divert or work our way around the issues legacies that we have up at site, but kind of meeting them head on. And river passage, river restoration is kind of at the forefront of why we are where we are with the Stibnite Gold Project. So what in front of us is essentially current site conditions as well as our overlay of what's the river is going to look like when it is actually restored. So Mackenzie touched on, kind of what base reclamation would be, but really what we mean when we say restoration is that we have a fully functioning river system that doesn't have any of those man-made implements that we kind of need to be addressing post-closure.
So the map now. Haley, or which slide do you see?
The map, so the Rio over.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you are.
Okay, perfect.
Because of that delay.
Haley, while we're waiting for the delay, can you answer Michelle Tucker's question on how much habitat will be expanded for aquatics?
Yes, so through fish tunnel, so that's a temporary solution, obviously, with our ultimate goal of river restoration, of it going back to where it needs to be. So what you see in front of you on this slide. Not only are we addressing issues of kind of opening up this platform, but also increasing habitat, wetlands, and area upstream. So it's roughly about 12 miles. Mackenzie, if you have any details that you want to chime in regarding fish, you know, kind of from a habitat perspective and wetlands, but it's definitely opening up of, you know, inaccessible habitat and area, but also kind of bringing the current site conditions back to where they need to be so they're suitable habitat as well.
Right. Overall, it's an improvement of over 12 miles of East Fork, South Fork, the Salmon River, and Meadow Creek. But in addition to that, we believe that through opening up some existing barriers, we'll be able to get Chinook and salmon, and steelhead, excuse me, over potentially about 20 additional miles of access to spawning grounds than they have today. So it's a fairly substantial opportunity for expanding that. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the process of where we are today. And Haley, I might just have to have you tell me which slide everyone sees because my computer is operating differently. I think I've got too many kids at the moment on Netflix, so I apologize if there's a delay, but I think that's it. So we all understand that there's a need to produce minerals here in this country, in the United States. You know, not only do they create part of our livelihoods and our quality of life, we absolutely know that we can do it better at home. And that's one of the points that we try to bring often, and how mining happens here in this country today, and that it's an opportunity to bring well-paid jobs and control over the environmental conditions of mining here at home. So currently, for the permitting of the Stibnite Gold Project, as I mentioned, we are going at this point to be about 4+ years of regulatory review in NEPA. We submitted our draft EIS to the Payette Forest in December of 2016. It was approved as complete and NEPA was launched. We currently have 11 state, federal, and local agencies involved through a joint review process working on the draft EIS process. So through Idaho does have a joint review process, MOU, between the states and the federal agencies. And we've found that this has actually been very helpful in coordinating the agencies through as much of a kind of addressing issues in a parallel process rather than always sequentially, to get the relevant regulators sitting around the same table, talking to each other, has helped us get through this process. Not quite as fast as we thought it would, but we still think that it's brought immense value overall to the project. Idaho has an Office of Energy and Mineral Resources, which sits under the governor's office. That agency has also been very helpful in coordinating the state agencies. So they kind of act as that ombudsman role between the governor's office and all of the different state agencies, coordinating our project and being then that direct voice to take all of the agency comments, make sure that they are consistent between departments before that message then, or feedback then, goes to the other partners around the table. So that as well has been extraordinarily helpful to us in the process. Right now, the forest and their engineering firm AECOM, as well as the other partner agencies, are preparing the draft environmental impact statement. As I mentioned earlier, it looks like now that this draft will be released in August. We had expected it in January. It turned out that the draft needed a lot of work. It was over 5,000 pages and not very accessible to the average person. And to in being able to review, understand, and really synthesize the findings so far in the draft. So they've gone back to the drawing board to really spend time in reorganizing the drafts so that it's more accessible to the general public. So it'll be out, again, as I mentioned, in August. We then anticipate a 45-day comment period with a potential 15-day extension. And we're doing everything we can to try to ensure that the public is well informed ahead of time so that there's a limited need for additional extensions beyond that 15-day extension that's optional within the forest. After that, we plan for about a 9-month to a year process for the agencies to review those comments and then prepare the draft final EIS sometime in the second quarter now of 2021. Through the permitting process, however, we've also made a number of modifications to our plan. So really modifications that were identified through the process and additional data collection and feedback from agencies and stakeholders. So in May, we submitted back to the Forest Service a list of changes to our plan, our proposed plan. We refer to this as the Modified Pro. We also think at this point that the Modified Pro will be considered as alternative 2 in the draft. And that is the alternative that we will be advocating for, that we think does the most to address and balance the economic and environmental considerations of the project. Some major changes that occurred within the Modified Pro are one, so the site will have, as you see here on this map, there's the West End pit, the Yellow Pine pit, which are current pits. They will just be expanded in our project. And then we create the Hanger Flats pit at the old site of the historic smelter on site. Originally, that was just going to be an open pit. We are now identifying ways through the Modified Pro to reduce the size of that pit and that pit lake at the end of the day. We've also identified some changes in our surface water management, really focused on keeping clean water clean and keeping water cool as it moves through site to reduce overall rise in water temperature. We also, through the scoping period, had a number of people in the recreation community show concern over our plan that cut off the current road that recreationalists use from Yellow Pine to get through to the old Thunder Mountain mining site, which is a kind of a recreation destination in Idaho. And a lot of hunters and outfitters and ATV recreationalists use that road, but it cuts straight through our site. And we weren't really, so we planned kind of an alternate route for those people, but it was a 40-mile or so alternate route. And the town of Yellow Pine and others expressed concern that that reroute would limit kind of the economic traffic that goes through the town of Yellow Pine. So we identified with a small kind of group of representatives of the recreation and Yellow Pine communities, a route that would go through site but be sequestered or sheltered from all mining activity. So that was another big difference in the plan, as well as some changes to our tailings facility design, and significantly that we would also produce lime on site rather than trucking it in. Significantly, actually, this dropped our traffic count by almost 23%, not having to truck lime into site every day. Instead, we're going to use lime that is contained, or limestone contained within the West End pit, and then build a kiln on site. Another question we get a lot is about financial assurance. So up until last year, Idaho did not use a standardized kind of true cost reclamation calculator like Nevada and others do across the country. So instead, Idaho only required a it was $15,000 per acre fee to put down through bonding to assure that reclamation is completed. So Midas and the Idaho Mining Association worked really hard with the Idaho legislature to pass a bill that would actually change that regulation here in Idaho and move us to a true cost calculation system, which is now in place as they are finalizing some of the rules. But we've stated around our financial assurance that we're preparing. The Forest Service has asked us to put up a model of that financial assurance, which we will do within the next couple of weeks. It'll be on our website. That model assumes the original plan, because of course we don't know what the plan will look like after the permitting process, but we wanted people to understand how we were thinking about financial assurance and how we were using the tool. So we've based our financial assurance calculation on that restoration standard that we've been talking about. We've also, this one will be, like many others, reviewed and evaluated in phases from every, essentially 3 to 5 years is how we're looking at it. Idaho law does allow for a corporate guarantee to be used as a financial tool, but instead we've committed to use more regular forms like bonds and trusts. We will be building in a calculation for long-term water treatment, and be preparing that calculation for others to see as quickly as we can. A little bit on the economic side, and Haley, I'll just go through this a little bit so that we don't have that delay issue. To kind of encapsulate or summarize the economic impact of this project, it's $1 billion investment, 37 miles of new road, 72 miles of new transmission line, and over 500 direct jobs. So we're really looking at it as kind of an economic opportunity for rural Idaho to provide some diversity within the economic makeup, particularly of the rural counties that we're in. We've also made a very clear commitment to hiring local, and that goes everywhere from staff to the companies that we use on site every day or as our vendors and contractors. Through the general phase of the project, we're looking at 400 direct jobs in the construction period, 500 direct jobs in the operating life, and then after that, between 200 to 50 or so jobs as we scale down through the reclamation and closure period. Of note also is that, this is within the boundaries of an economic opportunity zone where, at least before the last month, the unemployment rate was about 4.5 and a median income of about $56,000. So most people who are familiar with Midas know that we also spend a lot of time out in the community, not only talking with people, but investing very early on in the partnerships closest to us and to the people impacted by our project. As Haley mentioned, she is our tour guide. Last year, she took 30 tours up to site, and that is a full day in a very bouncy van on very remote dirt roads. And she's a wonderful ambassador for this project in her ability to connect with people, to bring the science and the technology and the kind of modern day ethos of mining and really personalize it for the people who go up. So last year, she brought up over 400 people to site on these tours. In the previous year, she did 50 tours and over 500 people. So we're seeing a lot of interest of people wanting to see what's going on there today, what might it look like in the future. And then once again, to kind of highlight Haley, the work that she's been doing in the community has been very significant as well. So in the last year, she spent over 700 hours in local classrooms doing STEM education. So really building not only that next generation of kids who want to be in the sciences and understand that mining is an important function that we can do here at home. So really, really great work by the team on the ground. And then finally, our kind of call to action at the moment is for everyone within industry to be counted, that our voices need to be a part of the process when it comes to these mining projects and the public comment periods. Not only so that regulators can hear from a group of knowledgeable, experienced, technical people who support mining, but that the public and elected officials and everyone else can see that there's a strong base of people in industry in this country who want to see more projects occur. And that's really been going to be a focus of ours for the next couple of months. So how we identify people who can speak with that knowledge base to the regulatory environment and submit comments. So our asks for you are join us on these briefings. If you have folks who or people that you can connect us to that you think might be interested in learning more, or you want to dive deep into the fish tunnel or how we're constructing the TSF or any other component of the river restoration that we're working on, we're happy to bring the experts to anyone pretty much at any time to dive deep and to spread greater understanding about how this project is being approached. So if you have people out there that you think would benefit from the conversation, connect us, let us know, and we'll be there. And then when we enter that comment period, we'll let you know through the Women Mining Coalition and through other organizations. We're going to be out there asking everyone, alerting people to let them know that the comment period is here. But if you want to know yourself, you can always go to countidahoin.com and sign up. And that's where we'll provide regular updates for people on the project, and then eventually provide tools for everyone once the comment period is open.